I walked into that barbershop thinking it would just be a quick haircut, nothing more. But from the moment I sat in her chair, I realized this was going to be different. The way she looked at me through the mirror, the way her hands moved so confidently, it wasn't just about style. Something about her presence pulled me in, and suddenly a simple haircut started to feel like the beginning of something I never expected. I had never been the type of person to chase trends or do something just because everyone was talking about it, but moving to a new city had me feeling restless. I wanted a change, even if I didn't know exactly what kind of change I was searching for. Everywhere I went, people seemed to mention the same name, the most famous barber in town. Friends at work, strangers on the subway, even a woman I bumped into at a cafe had something to say about this barber who could supposedly transform you, not just with a haircut but with the way you carried yourself afterward. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing more than hype, but after weeks of hearing the same stories again and again, I couldn't shake the curiosity. I caught myself looking in the mirror more often, tugging at my long, lifeless hair, wondering what it might feel like to let someone else take control, to let someone cut away more than just split ends. The idea scared me as much as it intrigued me. I had always been cautious with my appearance, keeping everything safe and predictable, but there was a part of me that was tired of blending in. Moving here was supposed to be about starting fresh, wasn't it? So why was I holding on to the same old version of myself? One night, sitting alone with my laptop, I typed the barber's name into the search bar. A flood of pictures and reviews popped up, people smiling with bold new styles, captions full of gratitude and excitement. Words like confidence, empowerment, and life-changing jumped out at me, and I laughed at how dramatic it all sounded. But beneath the laughter, something stirred in me, like a quiet whisper asking, "What if this could be you?" Before I could talk myself out of it, I booked an appointment. The day of the appointment felt heavier than I expected. My palms were sweaty as I walked toward the shop, the city buzzing around me while my mind raced with doubts. I told myself it was just hair, but it didn't feel like just hair. It felt like I was walking toward a decision I couldn't undo. As I reached the storefront, I paused, staring at the large glass window. Inside, people sat waiting, the hum of clippers filling the air. The shop had an energy to it, alive and loud, but not chaotic, more like a heartbeat you could feel the moment you stepped near. I pushed the door open, and the sound wrapped around me, instantly making me feel like an outsider stepping into another world. The first thing I noticed was her. She wasn't hidden in the back or quietly blending in with the others, she stood out immediately. She moved with a confidence that filled the room, greeting someone with a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. I froze for a second, taking her in, the sharp lines of her haircut, the tattoos peeking out from her sleeves, the way her presence commanded attention without her even trying. I hadn't expected the city's most famous barber to be a woman, and for some reason, that realization knocked the air out of me. There was something magnetic about her, something I couldn't name yet, and it unsettled me. She noticed me standing awkwardly by the door and walked over, her eyes locking onto mine with a warmth that made my chest tighten. "You must be my next appointment," she said with a grin, and I nodded, suddenly forgetting how to speak. She led me to the chair, her hand brushing lightly against my shoulder as she gestured for me to sit. The leather was cool against my skin, and I felt trapped between the mirror in front of me and the steady presence behind me. She asked what I wanted done, and for a moment, I stumbled over my words. I had rehearsed answers in my head, something safe like a trim, but when I met her gaze in the mirror, the rehearsed lines disappeared. Instead, I said, "I want something different. Something that feels new." Her smile widened, playful yet knowing, as if she had been waiting for me to say exactly that. "Different, huh? I can work with that," she replied, and there was a spark in her voice that made me both nervous and excited. She draped the cape over me, her fingers brushing lightly against my neck, sending a strange shiver down my spine. As the clippers buzzed to life, I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the vibration through the air, realizing that I was about to let this stranger reshape a part of me I had clung to for so long. The first snip of hair falling onto the cape made my heart jump. It was such a small thing, a lock of hair drifting down, but it felt like more than just hair being cut. I stared at it, tiny pieces of the old me collecting in my lap, and I wondered if she could see through me, if she knew how much I had been hiding. She started asking questions, casual ones about my job, where I was from, but somehow her tone made them feel deeper, as if she wasn't just asking to fill the silence. She listened intently, her eyes meeting mine through the mirror every so often, and each time I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain. The more we talked, the lighter I felt, even as my hair grew shorter with every pass of her scissors. It was like shedding layers I didn't even know I was carrying. She had a way of teasing without making me uncomfortable, pushing me just enough to laugh but also making me think. "You seem like someone who's afraid to take risks," she said at one point, her voice low but steady, and I couldn't even argue with her. She was right. I had been afraid for so long, living carefully, quietly, almost invisibly. And yet here I was, sitting in her chair, letting her strip away something I thought defined me. By the time she spun the chair around to show me the finished look, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. My hair was shorter than I had ever dared to wear it, sharper, bolder, and somehow it suited me in a way I never imagined. But what unsettled me most wasn't the haircut, it was the way she was looking at me through the mirror, as if she saw something more than just the new style. For a second, I forgot about the shop, the noise, the people around us. It was just her and me, and the strange energy crackling in the silence between words. When I finally stood to leave, I felt unsteady, not because of the haircut but because of everything I couldn't name that had happened in that chair. I thanked her, my voice softer than I intended, and she gave me a smile that lingered even after I walked out the door. The city streets looked the same as before, but I didn't feel the same. Something had shifted inside me, something I couldn't explain yet. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about her. The days after that first appointment felt strange, like I was living in two different realities at once. On the outside, people kept complimenting me on my new haircut, telling me how fresh and bold it looked, asking who had done it. I would smile politely, give them the name of the shop, and brush off their enthusiasm as if it didn't matter. But inside, I was buzzing. I couldn't stop replaying the way she had looked at me through the mirror, the warmth in her voice, the feeling of her fingers grazing my neck when she adjusted the cape. It was ridiculous, I told myself, she was just a barber, just doing her job. But no matter how many times I repeated that line, it didn't feel true. Something about the whole experience had stirred something deeper in me, something I had been ignoring for far too long. I tried to distract myself, diving into work, meeting with new acquaintances, scrolling endlessly through my phone at night. But every time my mind wandered, it drifted back to her. The way she had said I seemed afraid of risks, the way her words had landed heavier than I wanted to admit. I started noticing how much of my life had been about playing it safe, hiding behind routines, never daring to stand out. Even the haircut had felt like an accident, a sudden decision made because I couldn't stand my own reflection anymore. But now, looking in the mirror, I felt like I was staring at a version of myself that was daring me to change more than just my hair. And that scared me almost as much as it excited me. A week passed before I finally caved and made another appointment. I told myself I needed a quick trim, some small touch-up, but deep down I knew it wasn't about the hair. I just wanted to see her again, to sit in that chair and feel that strange energy between us. As I walked back into the shop, my heart raced in a way that felt completely out of proportion for something so ordinary. She was busy with another client when I arrived, but the moment her eyes caught mine across the room, she smiled in recognition. That smile hit me harder than I expected, as though she had been waiting for me to return. When it was my turn, she greeted me with that same playful tone, half teasing, half warm. "Back so soon? Couldn't stay away, huh?" I laughed nervously, trying to hide how accurate her words felt. I muttered something about just needing a little maintenance, but she tilted her head, eyes glinting, as if she knew there was more to it than that. As I settled into the chair, the same unease and excitement wrapped around me again, that strange mix of being exposed and comforted all at once. This time, the conversation flowed even easier. She asked me about my week, and before I knew it, I was telling her things I hadn't shared with anyone else in the city. I told her how the move had been harder than I expected, how I felt like I was always standing just outside of other people's lives, never really belonging. She listened without judgment, her hands steady as they moved through my hair, her eyes catching mine in the mirror every so often in a way that made me feel like she saw straight through me. It wasn't just small talk, it was connection, the kind that made my chest ache with something I didn't want to name yet. At one point, she leaned closer, her voice dropping a little as she asked, "Do you ever feel like you've been hiding pieces of yourself?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I just stared at her reflection, unsure how to respond. The truth was, yes, I had been hiding for years, burying feelings and thoughts I was too afraid to explore. I swallowed hard, giving a vague answer about how everyone keeps things private, but she didn't push. Instead, she smiled softly, as if to tell me she understood without me having to say more. That smile stayed with me long after she turned back to her scissors. The entire session was a tug-of-war between comfort and tension. Every time her hand brushed against my skin, I felt a jolt, like electricity humming just beneath the surface. Every time her eyes lingered on mine in the mirror, I had to look away before I gave too much away. But underneath the nerves was something undeniable, a pull, a quiet but growing attraction that I couldn't keep dismissing as my imagination. By the time she finished, I didn't just look different again, I felt different. Lighter, braver, and somehow more alive. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door, her hand brushing my arm lightly as she said, "See you soon?" It sounded casual, but the way she looked at me made it feel like more than a question. I nodded, unable to find words, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure she could hear it. As I stepped back onto the busy street, the noise of the city rushed around me, but inside I felt completely quiet, consumed by a single thought: I couldn't keep pretending this was just about hair. Something was happening between us, something I didn't fully understand yet, but I knew I wanted more of it. Leaving the shop that second time felt heavier than the first. The air outside was warm, but I felt a strange chill inside, like I had just stepped out of a place where my world was shifting and back into one that expected me to stay the same. I walked through the streets replaying every moment, the way she smiled when she caught me staring, the way her voice dropped low when she asked about the pieces of myself I might be hiding, the casual brush of her hand that left me feeling more awake than I had in years. I told myself I needed to stop obsessing, that it wasn't healthy to keep thinking about a woman I barely knew, but the truth was I didn't want to stop. Every thought of her felt like a secret spark inside me, one I hadn't felt in a long, long time, maybe ever. The next few days, I tried to settle back into normal life, but normal felt impossible. Friends at work kept commenting on my haircut, saying it made me look braver, edgier, like I had stepped into a new version of myself. They laughed about how I finally looked like I belonged in the city, and I laughed along, but inside, their words stirred something deeper. I couldn't explain why, but I felt different, not just on the outside but in the way I carried myself. And it all tied back to her. At night, lying awake, I found myself scrolling through my phone, hovering over the barbershop's social media page, staring at photos of her latest work. I wondered what she was like outside the shop, who she spent her evenings with, what made her laugh when no one was watching. It was absurd, but the curiosity was constant, gnawing at me like hunger. I told myself I wouldn't go back so soon, that I needed to give it time, but less than 2 weeks later, I found myself walking toward the shop again. I made up excuses in my head, maybe the cut needed reshaping, maybe I should try something even bolder, but deep down I knew I wasn't going for the haircut. I was going because I wanted to see her. I wanted to feel that strange rush again, sitting in her chair, caught between fear and excitement. When I opened the door, the familiar buzz of clippers and chatter filled the air, but all I saw was her. She looked up from her client, her eyes catching mine across the room, and the small smile that touched her lips felt like it was just for me. When my turn came, she didn't even ask what I wanted this time. "Let's just clean it up a bit," she said, her tone casual, but there was a warmth in her voice that made it feel like more than routine. As she worked, we slipped into conversation so naturally it startled me. I found myself telling her things I hadn't planned to share, about the loneliness I felt since moving, about how I often pretended to be more confident than I actually was, about how I sometimes wondered if I was living the life I truly wanted or just the life that felt safe. She didn't laugh or dismiss any of it. She listened, really listened, like every word mattered. And every time our eyes met in the mirror, I felt that same electric jolt, that same unspoken connection growing between us. She shared little pieces of herself too, though never too much at once. She told me about her love for music, about how she started cutting hair as a teenager because it made her feel powerful to transform people. She said something that stayed with me, that cutting hair was never just about looks, it was about helping people see the parts of themselves they were too afraid to reveal. I froze when she said it because it felt like she was speaking directly to me, like she could see the truth I had spent years trying to bury. As the session went on, the tension between us grew thicker, though neither of us acknowledged it directly. Every touch of her hands felt like more than just her doing her job. Every glance through the mirror felt like a question hanging in the air, one I wasn't ready to answer. When she leaned in close to trim around my ear, her breath brushed against my skin, and I had to fight the urge to shiver. My pulse raced in a way I couldn't explain, and I knew then that I was crossing into dangerous territory. This wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something I couldn't push aside anymore. When she finished, I looked at myself in the mirror, and once again, I barely recognized the person staring back. It wasn't just the haircut, it was the way my eyes seemed brighter, the way my shoulders seemed straighter. She stood behind me, her hands still resting lightly on the back of the chair, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched, heavy and charged, and I had the wild thought that if I turned around, if I met her eyes without the mirror between us, something would happen that would change everything. But I didn't. I stayed still, too afraid of what I might discover. When I finally stood, she gave me that same lingering smile as before, the kind that made my stomach twist and my chest ache. "Don't wait too long to come back," she said softly, and it felt less like a suggestion and more like an invitation. I nodded, my throat too tight to respond, and walked out into the street, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the sounds of the city around me. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. I couldn't deny it anymore. I wasn't just drawn to her because she was confident or talented or kind. I was drawn to her because she made me feel something I had buried for years. Feelings I had always pushed aside, told myself weren't real, weren't possible for me. But sitting in her chair, looking into her eyes through the mirror, every lie I had told myself about who I was began to unravel. I was scared, more scared than I had been in a long time, but underneath the fear was something stronger, a pull, a longing, a truth that I could no longer ignore. It was late in the afternoon when I booked another appointment, almost impulsively, as if some invisible force had taken control of me. I had tried to resist, telling myself I should space things out, that going too often would make it obvious, but my resolve crumbled the moment I felt the quiet ache of missing her. The shop wasn't as crowded this time, the buzz of conversation softer, almost fading into the background. She glanced up when I entered, her eyes finding mine immediately, and for a second it felt like the whole room disappeared. She finished with her client and called me over, her voice smooth and casual, but I caught the flicker of something in her smile that sent a ripple through my chest. I sat down in her chair, and this time the air between us was heavier, thicker, like we had both been carrying unspoken words since the last time. She asked if I wanted something new again, but I shook my head, saying I was fine with just a small touch-up. She raised an eyebrow, half amused, half questioning, but didn't push. The cape settled over me, her hands brushing my shoulders, lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. My skin burned under her touch, though I kept my face neutral, afraid of giving anything away. She began working in silence at first, the sound of scissors cutting through the quiet, and I found myself watching her reflection instead of my own. The concentration in her face, the ease of her movements, the way she carried herself as if she belonged completely in her own skin, it was magnetic. It wasn't long before the silence between us broke. She asked how I had been, her tone light but her eyes sharp, as if she already knew my answer. I admitted things had been difficult, that I felt like I was still searching for my place in this city. She tilted her head thoughtfully, her hands never pausing, and asked me what I was really searching for. The question cut deeper than I expected, and I hesitated, my throat tightening around the truth I wasn't ready to say. I muttered something vague about wanting to feel like myself, and she gave me a small, knowing smile in the mirror, like she could see the words I had swallowed back. As the shop emptied and the evening drew closer, the atmosphere shifted. The noise faded, the clippers fell silent, and before I knew it, it was just the two of us in the dim light of the shop. The air felt different, warmer, quieter, filled with a tension I could no longer ignore. She draped the towel around my neck, brushing loose strands of hair away, and then leaned against the counter beside me, not rushing me out like I had expected. Instead, she asked me about my move, my life before this city, the reasons I came here. I answered slowly, carefully, but her gaze stayed steady on mine, making it impossible to retreat into half-truths. At some point, she shared her own story. She told me how she had always been bold, even when people hated her for it. How she had faced rejection, gossip, even cruelty, but never let it bend her. She admitted it hadn't always been easy, that there were nights she went home feeling broken, but she learned that hiding who she was only made the world win. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I could hear the strength in her voice, but also the pain beneath it, and it made me wonder if that was why she had been able to see through me from the beginning, because she knew what it meant to hide. I listened with my chest tightening, feeling both admiration and fear. I wanted that kind of courage, but I didn't know if I had it in me. I was good at pretending, at blending in, at convincing people I was fine when I wasn't. But sitting there with her, listening to her honesty, I felt my defenses crumble. She made it look so easy, yet I knew it wasn't, and the thought of letting go of my carefully built walls terrified me. The silence stretched after she finished speaking, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with meaning, with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. She leaned a little closer, her shoulder brushing mine, and the small touch sent a current rushing through me. My breath caught, my heart stumbling in my chest. I wanted to tell her everything, how her presence made me feel alive, how I had been drawn to her since the first moment, how the truth I had buried for years was clawing its way back to the surface, but the words refused to come. Instead, I just sat there, staring at our reflections, the air thick with what neither of us dared to speak aloud. She laughed softly then, not mocking but tender, and said, "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready." The kindness in her tone undid me more than any blunt question could have. She wasn't asking for confessions, she wasn't pushing me to leap before I was ready, she was giving me space, a kind of safety I hadn't known I craved. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod, my eyes stinging in a way I couldn't explain. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door, her steps slow as if she wasn't in a hurry to see me go. For a moment, we stood there in the fading light, the city sounds muffled by the glass between us and the street outside. She looked at me with that same quiet intensity, and I felt myself leaning toward her without even realizing it. I stopped just in time, stepping back before the moment crossed a line I wasn't ready for. She didn't look disappointed, only smiled softly, like she understood the battle raging inside me. "Take your time," she said gently, and those 3 words echoed in my chest long after I left. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every detail of the evening. The sound of her voice, the strength in her story, the way her shoulder had brushed mine, and the softness in her eyes when she told me I didn't have to be ready yet. I realized then that this wasn't just a crush, not just an infatuation. This was the beginning of something that could change me forever, something that was both terrifying and beautiful. And as much as I wanted to fight it, as much as I wanted to retreat back into the safety of denial, I knew I couldn't. I had already crossed a line, even if only in my heart. The days after that quiet evening at the shop became some of the most restless nights of my life. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my thoughts looping endlessly, filled with her voice and the steady way she had looked at me when she said I didn't have to be ready yet. Those words echoed in me like a song I couldn't stop humming. I thought about how patient she had been, how she didn't push me even when I knew she could sense everything I was holding back. It made me feel seen, understood in a way I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. But it also cracked something open in me, something I had been avoiding for years, and now I couldn't close it again. I started remembering little things from my past, moments I had buried so deep they had almost felt like dreams. The friend in high school I had wanted to spend every waking moment with, the way my stomach used to twist when she brushed my hand by accident. The girl in college I admired too much, watching her laugh from across the room, secretly aching when she dated someone else. I had told myself all those feelings were nothing more than admiration, simple closeness, normal passing connections. I convinced myself I was imagining it, that it wasn't real. But now, sitting with these memories, I knew I had lied to myself for so long. And meeting her, the barber, with her fearless presence and quiet patience, was dragging those lies into the light. I tried to bury myself in work, tried to fill my calendar with things that didn't matter, hoping the noise would drown out the truth rising in me. But it didn't work. No distraction was strong enough. The silence between tasks only made the truth louder. I felt like I was split in two, one version of me walking through the world, smiling, answering emails, nodding along in conversations, and another version of me screaming beneath the surface, desperate to breathe. The weight of that split was exhausting. Every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because of the haircut but because my eyes looked haunted, full of longing and fear tangled together. I knew I couldn't keep running from it, so I booked another appointment. This time I didn't even pretend it was about the haircut. I didn't even rehearse an excuse in my head. I just knew I needed to see her. When I walked into the shop, my pulse quickened instantly, my breath caught in my chest, and when she turned to greet me, her smile felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She didn't tease me this time, didn't make any comment about me coming back too soon. She just gestured to the chair with a soft look in her eyes, as if she knew exactly why I was there. The moment I sat down, I felt that familiar mix of nervousness and comfort, like being exposed but safe at the same time. She draped the cape around me, her fingers brushing against my neck again, and I swear my entire body came alive with that small touch. I wanted to tell her everything, but my throat closed up, my courage slipping through my fingers before I could form the words. For a while, we sat in silence, the gentle snip of the scissors the only sound between us. Then, almost without thinking, I said quietly, "I don't know who I am anymore." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and the moment they left my mouth, my heart hammered in panic. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she met my eyes in the mirror, her expression calm, steady, almost tender. "Maybe you're finally becoming who you've always been," she said softly. The simplicity of her response undid me. My chest tightened, my eyes stung, and I wanted to argue, to push back, to hide again, but I couldn't. The truth of her words sank deep, pulling at every part of me I had been keeping locked away. I told her then, my voice shaking, that I was confused, that I had these feelings I didn't understand, that I was afraid of what people would say, afraid of what it would mean if I admitted them. My words tumbled out clumsy and broken, but she never once looked away. She just listened, her hands slowing but never leaving my hair, as if grounding me while I fell apart. When I finally stopped speaking, embarrassed by how much I had revealed, she set down the scissors and rested her hands lightly on the back of the chair. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," she said, her voice low and steady. "You just have to be honest with yourself. The rest will come." That was all. No long lecture, no advice about what I should do, just that small reminder that honesty with myself mattered more than anyone else's opinion. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The rest of the session passed quietly, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, gentle, like a blanket instead of a weight. Every now and then she'd glance at me in the mirror, not with expectation but with reassurance, like she was telling me without words that she wasn't going anywhere. When she finished, I looked at myself and saw more than a haircut. I saw someone standing on the edge of change, terrified but ready to take one more step forward. As I left that evening, I didn't feel the same kind of restless ache I had before. I still had fear inside me, yes, but it was mixed with something else now, hope. Hope that maybe I didn't have to keep living in the shadows of who I was. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this connection I felt wasn't just in my head. She had given me more than a haircut again. She had given me permission to stop hiding from myself. And as I walked into the night, my heart pounding but lighter than it had been in years, I knew I couldn't turn back. The days after opening myself up to her left me feeling raw, almost fragile, but also strangely free. It was as if speaking my fears aloud had loosened something that had been strangling me for years. I still didn't know what to call the feelings inside me, still didn't have the words to name the attraction that was growing stronger every time I thought of her, but I knew one thing for certain: I wanted to be near her. I craved it like air. That want scared me, because it wasn't the safe kind of want I had trained myself to hold on to all these years. It was powerful, alive, and it made me restless in ways I couldn't disguise anymore. We started talking more, slowly at first, then with a rhythm that became natural. Sometimes it was over coffee, where we would sit across from each other and let conversation spill from light jokes to heavier truths without ever forcing it. Other times it was late at night, trading messages back and forth until I fell asleep with the phone still in my hand, her words the last thing on my mind. Each time I saw her name light up my screen, I felt that rush, that flicker of something too strong to ignore. And with every conversation, I felt myself stepping out of the shadows I had lived in for so long. One evening, after work, she suggested we meet for a walk instead of the usual coffee. The city was buzzing, neon lights reflecting off the wet streets after a light rain. I remember walking beside her, close enough that our arms brushed every now and then, sending waves of heat through me that I tried to mask with nervous laughter. We talked about everything and nothing, about music, about the future, about how the city sometimes felt too big to ever truly belong in. She told me about her favorite places, the hidden corners of the city where she felt most like herself. Listening to her felt like listening to someone who wasn't afraid to exist, and the more I listened, the more I wanted to learn how to exist like that too. It started raining again, sudden and heavy, catching us in the middle of an empty street. We both laughed as we ran for cover, ducking beneath the awning of a closed shop. My hair clung to my face, water dripping down my clothes, and when I looked at her, standing there drenched and smiling, my chest ached in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The laughter died slowly between us, replaced by a silence that wasn't empty at all. It was thick, full of unspoken words, full of questions neither of us wanted to ruin by asking. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. The world felt impossibly still, the rain muffled in the background, the glow of streetlights casting everything in soft, golden shadows. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. And then, before I could process what was happening, she leaned closer. It wasn't sudden or rushed. It was careful, almost hesitant, giving me the space to step back if I wanted to. But I didn't. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might collapse, but I didn't move away. When her lips finally touched mine, it was like every piece of me I had locked away cracked open at once. The kiss was soft at first, gentle, almost questioning, but the weight of it was undeniable. I felt like the ground had disappeared, like the city had vanished, and there was nothing left except the press of her lips against mine and the warmth of her hand brushing against my cheek. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a promise, a breaking of walls I had built for years. I kissed her back, my body trembling, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt alive, more real than I had ever allowed myself to be. When we finally pulled away, I couldn't speak. My breath came in shaky bursts, my chest heavy with emotion I didn't know how to name. She looked at me with a softness that both comforted and terrified me, as if she understood exactly what that moment meant for me. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You don't have to be afraid of this." Those words sank into me, soothing the storm inside my chest even as tears stung my eyes. We stayed there for a while under that awning, the rain falling harder around us, our shoulders pressed together, the silence between us filled with everything that had finally been spoken without words. I didn't want the night to end, didn't want to let go of the fragile, beautiful truth that had bloomed between us in that moment. Eventually, we walked home together, not saying much, but every step felt different, every glance charged with something new and undeniable. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the kiss over and over, my fingers brushing against my lips as if I could still feel her there. It terrified me, how right it had felt, how much I already longed for more. But beneath the fear was a quiet certainty, one I could no longer bury. This was real. This was me. And for the first time, I didn't want to run from it. The morning after that kiss was unlike any other morning I had lived before. I woke up with my heart still racing, my lips tingling as if her touch had branded me, and my mind spinning with every tiny detail of what had happened under the rain. The way she had leaned in slowly, the warmth of her hand against my face, the softness of her words afterward, it all replayed in loops that left me both breathless and restless. I tried to move through my routine, brushing my teeth, pouring coffee, answering work emails, but nothing felt normal anymore. The world outside my window looked the same, but inside me, something had shifted forever. And the truth of it scared me more than anything else, because I knew there was no way to go back to who I had been before that night. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my friends, not my family, not even the coworkers who usually picked up on the smallest changes in me. I carried the secret close, almost protectively, as if saying it out loud to anyone else might break its fragile magic. But carrying it also made me hyper-aware of everything around me. I started noticing the way people talked about love, the way they assumed it was always between a man and a woman, the way movies and conversations reinforced that idea over and over. And each time I noticed it, I felt the walls pressing in tighter, because I knew I was no longer on the outside of those conversations. I was inside them now, living a truth I hadn't dared to claim before. The fear of being seen for what I really felt started to grow alongside the warmth of it. Every time I thought about telling someone, I imagined the look on their face, confusion, maybe judgment, maybe even rejection. I thought about my family and the expectations they had, about how they had always pictured my life, about how far I was already drifting from that picture. It made me ache with guilt, with the weight of secrets, but even in the middle of all that fear, I couldn't erase the memory of her smile in the rain. I couldn't unfeel the way my body had come alive in her presence. No amount of fear could make that less true. I saw her again a few days later. This time there was no pretense, no appointment, no excuse about a haircut. I simply texted her, and she told me to come by after she closed up the shop. My heart hammered the entire way there, every step heavier than the last. When I arrived, the shop was quiet, the chairs empty, the lights softer than usual. She was sweeping the floor when I walked in, and when she looked up at me, her smile was the kind that said she had been waiting. I froze in the doorway for a moment, not knowing how to explain why I was really there, but she didn't make me explain. She just put the broom aside, walked toward me, and with that same calm steadiness she had shown from the very beginning, she closed the distance between us and took my hand. The simple act of her fingers threading through mine sent a shiver through me. I had never held another woman's hand like that before, never allowed myself to. It felt so small, yet so monumental, like a line being crossed that I could never uncross. I looked at her, my throat tight, my eyes stinging, and whispered, "I don't know how to do this." My voice cracked, heavy with the fear I carried. She squeezed my hand gently, her thumb brushing against my skin. "There's nothing to figure out," she said softly. "We just take it one step at a time. Together." Her words settled into me like an anchor. For once, I didn't feel like I was drifting alone. We sat in the back of the shop after that, the quiet hum of the city beyond the windows wrapping around us. We talked for hours, about her life, about mine, about the people who had shaped us and the things we both feared. She told me about the first time she realized she liked women, about the loneliness that came with it, but also about the freedom she felt once she stopped hiding. I listened with my whole heart, clinging to every word, because hearing her story made me feel less like a stranger to myself. There were moments when the fear inside me surged so strongly I thought I might break down, but each time, she steadied me. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with the simplest things, a steady look, a gentle touch, the reminder that I didn't have to rush into answers I wasn't ready for. Being with her was like stepping into a space where time slowed down, where the noise of the world faded, and where I could simply exist without apology. For the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't broken for feeling the way I did. Maybe I was just finally allowing myself to live. When I left that night, the city lights glimmered differently. The streets I had walked countless times before seemed alive in a way I hadn't noticed. I felt like I was carrying a secret flame inside me, something delicate but burning too brightly to ignore. And though fear still clung to me, wrapping around my ribs and whispering doubts, the flame pushed back against it. Because now I had touched something real, something I couldn't deny. And no matter how the world might see me, no matter what challenges waited ahead, I knew I didn't want to let that flame go out. The final weeks after that night at her shop unfolded in ways I could never have predicted. Life didn't suddenly become easy, and the world didn't magically open its arms to me without hesitation, but something inside me had shifted too deeply to ever go back. I walked with a new awareness, one that was both heavy and freeing. Every time I thought of her, every time my phone lit up with her name, every time I replayed the memory of our kiss or the softness in her eyes, I felt the quiet certainty that I was standing on the edge of a new life. And that thought both terrified me and gave me hope. For years I had lived quietly in the lines drawn for me, smiling when I was expected to, nodding along when people imagined a future I never wanted. Now those lines felt thinner, easier to step over. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled me in the same way. I knew at some point I would have to face the world with this truth. I couldn't keep living in the in-between, hiding from everyone while holding on to her in secret. That thought haunted me every night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who would still stand by me if I showed them who I really was. The fear of losing people I loved was sharp, almost unbearable at times. But every time I imagined letting her go just to keep others comfortable, the ache in my chest told me that wasn't an option anymore. The thought of losing myself was worse than the thought of losing them. She must have sensed this war inside me, because she never pushed, never demanded more than I could give. Instead, she stayed close, patient and steady, letting me take each step at my own pace. One evening, sitting together on a park bench as the sun went down, I finally found the courage to speak what had been building inside me. My hands were shaking, my voice uneven, but I told her I didn't want to keep pretending. I told her that even if I wasn't ready to tell the whole world yet, I was ready to tell the truth to myself. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned in and wrapped her arms around me, holding me with a tenderness that broke me open. "That's enough," she whispered into my hair. "That's more than enough." Her acceptance, her quiet belief in me, gave me the strength I needed to take the next steps. Slowly, carefully, I started letting small pieces of my truth slip into the light. I told one close friend, my voice trembling as I admitted what I had always kept hidden. To my surprise, they didn't turn away. They hugged me, told me they were proud of me, told me love is love no matter who it's with. That moment didn't erase all my fears, but it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, the world wouldn't shatter around me the way I had always imagined. As days turned into weeks, I noticed changes in myself I hadn't expected. I laughed more freely, spoke more openly, even carried myself differently, as if the weight I had been dragging for so long had finally started to lift. I caught myself smiling at random times, a softness in me that came from knowing I didn't have to live a lie anymore. And every time I saw her, it was like stepping into a space that reminded me why all of this was worth it. She had become more than just the girl at the barber's chair. She had become the mirror in which I finally saw myself clearly. There were still hard days, moments when the fear returned with claws, whispering that I was making a mistake, that people would walk away, that I would regret everything. But each time those doubts rose up, she was there. Sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, always with the kind of presence that reminded me I wasn't alone anymore. And with each shared laugh, each late-night conversation, each moment of quiet understanding, the fear grew smaller, easier to live with. Looking back, it feels surreal how it all started. I had walked into that barbershop thinking it was just another haircut, something so ordinary, so forgettable. But that simple choice had led me here, to this place of truth and transformation I never thought I'd find. Life has a strange way of guiding us, of taking us where we need to go even when we fight it every step of the way. And in that shop, in that chair, in her hands, I had unknowingly stepped into the beginning of myself. Now, as I stand in front of the mirror in my own room, staring at the reflection of a woman who finally recognizes herself, I feel something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the loud kind, not the kind you announce to the world, but the quiet kind that settles in your chest when you know you've stopped hiding. I don't know what the future holds for us, for me, for the life I'm building. But I do know that I'll never again let fear silence the truth inside me. Because once you've tasted what it feels like to live honestly, you can't go back. And so, the story that began with a haircut ended with something far bigger: an awakening, a love I never dared to dream of, and a courage I didn't know I had. What started as a strange, unexpected moment in a chair had grown into the most important journey of my life. A journey not just of falling in love with her, but of finally learning to fall in love with myself.